Australia seems to take a lesson from George Orwell, with a new tracking system for quarantine, including geolocation and face recognition. But don't worry, it's to fight COVID. Good day, and welcome to Australia Uncovered. I'm Chris Chappell, because today we're going to be talking about Australia, and specifically how Australian authorities are using COVID to try out a new system to track citizens at all times. It's starting in the state of South Australia. Recently, the South Australian government unveiled a new downloadable app that uses facial recognition technology and GPS to enforce home-based quarantines, which sounds a bit extreme. But to be fair, this is Australia, and staying in your home was always the best option. COVID is the least likely thing there that will kill you. This app has been getting a lot of attention from the media, and it's not positive attention. Some are calling the technology Orwellian, a reference to the book 1984, where Big Brother is watching you at all times. Or to put it in a less intellectual way, it's nightmare technology. And to put it in an even less intellectual way, crikey, throw that rubbish on the Barbie. Now I know what you're thinking. This is Australia, not China. It can't really be that bad, right? Well, let me tell you how it works, and you can decide for yourself. Let's start with a little role play. Imagine you're an Australian citizen. Yeah, I can do that. And now let's say you live in South Australia, but you recently traveled to New South Wales to visit your mum. And now you want to come home to South Australia. When you get to South Australia, you'll be required to quarantine for 14 days, or what Australians call a fortnight. And if you want to quarantine at home, you'll also be required to download an app onto your phone called Home Quarantine SA. Don't worry, it's available on Google Play and the Apple App Store, and it's free. Easy peasy. Just input a few personal details into the app, nothing too revealing, just your full name, your date of birth, your address, your phone number, and your email address. The same type of info you'd give when setting up a profile on an Australian dating app. Dingo K-Cupid. Once you have downloaded the app and safely arrived at your place of quarantine, the app will contact you multiple times each day at random. And each time, you have 15 minutes to provide proof of your location. The camera in the phone will make sure it's actually you, while the GPS in your phone makes sure you are where you said you would be. If this app acted any more like an overly suspicious girlfriend, it'd go through your Facebook messages and ask, "Who's Linda? And why does she send you so many winky emojis?" If you miss a check-in, you'll get a follow-up phone call from the Home Quarantine SA team so that you can explain why you missed your check-in. If you missed the phone call, your friendly neighborhood compliance officer may be sent to your house to check on you. If you're not there, the police will go looking for you. And there is a 1,000 Australian dollar on-the-spot fine for breaching quarantine. So be sure to take your wallet with you when you leave. And don't let them catch you out with Linda. Of course, depending on the situation, you might just be arrested instead. And don't worry about the information you entered into the app. It's safe. According to South Australian Premier Stephen Marshall, the government won't be storing any of the information provided to the app, even though the app was developed by the government. But you can always trust the government that tracks your every movement and arrests you for leaving your house, right? I guess that's why people are concerned about information security. The app is easy and convenient, and it's for your safety and the safety of the community, of course. So that's how it works. Personal information, facial recognition, and constant location tracking like a 24/7 digital parole officer. When Americans complain about how our government is handling COVID lockdowns, Australians probably go, That's not an invasion of privacy. That's an invasion of privacy. Right now, the app is in a trial phase with only about 50 people participating. But that's just the beginning of a potentially much larger rollout. I'll show you more after the break. Welcome back. South Australia is trying out a new COVID quarantine app that tracks people using facial recognition and geolocation. If the trial works out, international arrivals to South Australia could start doing home quarantines using the app in the next few weeks. And then, as South Australian Premier Stephen Marshall put it, I'm pretty sure the technology that we have developed within the South Australia government will become the national standard and will be rolled out across the country. I think Australians were more excited when it was announced that massive wildfires were rolling out across the country. Premier Marshall also said South Australians should feel pretty proud that we are the national pilot for the home-based quarantine app. I don't know how proud I would feel to be piloting an app like that. The last time this many people had their privacy invaded because of a bad pilot was after 9/11. But before we rush to judgment, let's put the app in context. South Australia isn't the first state in Australia to use this kind of technology. There is a similar app called G2G Now, already in use in the state of Western Australia. And according to the G2G Now website, it makes quarantine checks quick, fun, and easy. Because if I'm going to get hauled off to jail just for leaving my home, I prefer it to be quick, fun, and easy. The difference is that South Australia's home quarantine SA was developed by the state government, while G2G Now was developed under a private contract. Clearly, these apps fill a need. But what need? Well, in order to understand why these apps exist, first you have to understand Australia's reaction to the coronavirus. Australia has been operating under something called the COVID-0 or Zero COVID policy. This policy is otherwise known as the Zero COVID Nightmare. It's a pretty extreme policy compared to most other countries. And to enforce such an extreme policy, the government is taking extreme measures. At a national level, no one is allowed to leave Australia, with a few exceptions. Look, I know Australia was founded by a bunch of criminals, but that doesn't mean the government should turn it into a giant prison. Each Australian state is responsible for its own specific form of the Zero COVID policy. Most policies include lockdowns, with all but essential businesses required to shut down, curfews, and tight travel restrictions. It's been this way for more than a year, turning most of Australia into a deserted wasteland. Well, more of a deserted wasteland. As of right now, most travel from New South Wales to neighboring South Australia is prohibited. And if you're an exception, you have to fill out a health exemption application with the South Australian Health Authority. And you have to download the MySA.gov app onto your smartphone before you travel, because you'll need to use the app's COVID Safe Check-in to scan QR codes at the airport, in the taxi or Uber that takes you from the airport, and at any businesses you go to, including the grocery store. But for most interstate or international travelers who are allowed into South Australia, they will be required to quarantine for 14 days. So going to the store won't be an option. Meaning they won't have access to Vegemite, which is probably the best consequence of this policy. Until now, most of the quarantines have been done in government-run Medi-hotels, which are like regular hotels but with nursing staff available. And travelers may be required to pay for their own stay in a Medi-hotel, which can cost about $2,000 for 2 weeks. For that price, they better have one heck of a continental breakfast. Although, considering it's Australia, the continental breakfast is also a country breakfast. All this is why the new option to quarantine at home may seem more appealing, even if it requires you to download an app that forces you to repeatedly scan your face and send it to the government. At home, you can even have groceries delivered, as long as you don't interact with the person delivering them. To be fair, at-home self-quarantines were sometimes allowed before now, but it was costing the South Australian government a lot of money to pay for all the police to constantly check on those people. So, the South Australian government decided, why not make an app for that? It's cheaper for you than staying in a hotel, and cheaper for the state than sending police to check on you all the time. You know, as long as everyone obeys the government and doesn't intentionally ignore the notifications, forcing the police to come check on them anyway. Australians would never do that. It's not like Australia is an island of knife-wielding, VB-drinking criminals. So all of these heavy-handed quarantines are in service of Australia's zero COVID policy, the idea that Australia can simply stop COVID completely. But has the zero COVID policy worked? We'll look into that after the break. Welcome back. Australia has the most severe lockdown policies of any liberal democracy, assuming you can still include Australia in the list of liberal democracies. But their policy was effective. They had almost no new COVID cases since the beginning of this year, at least until the Delta variant came along in June. And then Australia became a mess. Well, a mess in a different way than before. Yeah, it's a mess, even though the case rates are still low compared to countries like the United States, the United Kingdom, France, Germany, and Canada. In Australia, about 0.25% of people have tested positive for COVID at some point in the last year and a half. Compare that to 12% in the United States. So while cases are extremely low, they're not zero, meaning in the face of Delta, the COVID zero policy has become unsustainable. But many government officials refuse to accept that there's nothing they can do. That's why technologies like the Home Quarantine SA app seem so appealing. To them, that is. People in power gaining more power isn't that appealing to everyone else. But how did it even get this way? Did Australians just roll over and let their freedoms be trampled on? Well, no, they didn't. There have been plenty of lockdown protests, but those have been met with plenty of police cracking down on those protests. Although not all Australians feel oppressed. This article calls the COVID lockdown freedom, not jail. I assume the person who wrote that article considers 1984 a utopian novel. So what does any of this have to do with America? Well, a lot of people are concerned about what's happening to freedom in Australia. It's not just civil rights groups in Australia, but even liberal American magazine The Atlantic says Australia traded away too much liberty for temporary safety. And the left-leaning think tank, the Brookings Institution, says Australia's democratic system is at risk. Some Americans on the right see disturbing similarities with trends going on in the United States. So if Americans need a concrete reason to be wary of government overreach in times of crisis, all they need to do is look at Australia. Australia is trampling civil liberties. And watch out, because when Australia flushes civil liberties down the drain, they go counterclockwise. What do you think? How should freedom be balanced against safety during a public health crisis? Let us know in the comments. And remember, America Uncovered is supported mainly by viewers like you. So head over to our Patreon page, contribute $1 or more per episode so we can keep making content like this for you. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. Thanks for watching Australia Uncovered. Mate.